This is Ryan and Michelle, and welcome to the Celebrate MarriageCast, where we hope to restore and reclaim godly marriages through honest and real conversations.
Welcome to episode 47. We are so glad that you're joining us today. You, our listener, are the whole reason that we're doing what we're doing. We want to help, like Ryan said, we want to help your relationship. And the best way that we can continue to get the word out is by having you like and subscribe and share. So we have a big ask for you today that you would just continue supporting us in that way. It's so simple, it's so easy, and it really helps to get the Celebrate MarriageCast out there. So thank you for your support. We know so many people are having their lives changed by this content. So thank you. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate your presence. We have a guest back today, Ryan.
Yeah.
We left our listeners with a teaser last week.
Bit of a cliffhanger.
It's kind of like when your favorite series ends and then it's like you're waiting for the next one.
Yeah.
In anticipation.
Right.
So today we have Tony Boer back with Sioux Empire Christian Counseling. He is a licensed family and marriage therapist, and he runs a practice here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And he has brought to us the top issues that he sees in his practice. So this is real life stuff, you guys. And he is sharing it with us. So Tony, welcome back to the Celebrate MarriageCast.
Thanks for having me back. I was thinking when you guys were talking about the cliffhangers and stuff is nowadays on Netflix, you can just binge them all and you don't have to wait. Whereas you didn't have to wait. For me, when I was a kid, you got to wait till next fall till it starts all over again.
Yeah.
You guys had to only wait a week, and here we are. We're going to get the last two and go from there.
That's right. We made them wait a little bit, but yeah.
So Tony, as you know, as Michelle said, you're in the thick of this every day. Mm-hmm. It's what you do. You help couples through different issues, different things that come up. Maybe they just want to improve. So we're going through the top 5. Maybe just run through what 5, 4, 3 were. Just quick overview of what those were. And then we'll jump into the top 2.
And we'll see if people got it right, because we gave everyone an assignment to get with your spouse, your partner, and to decide what it was for you and what you think it is. So
see if you can guess the last 2. So quick review. Number 5 was couples just coming in wanting to grow, learn, make their marriage better, right? Make your marriage go from good to great or okay. We talked a little bit about do you want the gold medal? Let's put in the work, right? So there are couples that come into marriage therapy that go, can you help us get better? And there isn't any big underlying problem or thing. They just want to get better.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. That's such a noble step into action, that they're not complacent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Number 4, family, in-laws, relatives, just walking that balance, trying to join a new family, create boundaries for your own family. There's always some family stuff trying to get people caught up is hey, this is what my family's like. This is how they operate. Some families have 2 families. Some families have 3 families that they have to join. So it's just family issues was that number 4 one.
Yeah, that was great advice. If you missed it, go back and listen.
Yeah.
All right. And number 3, getting trickier all the time, right, is money. Money is an issue that keeps happening, and we're always going to be talking about money. It's a never-ending thing, so we better learn how to get good at it and make sure we don't hurt each other while we're talking about it.
Yeah, and that's such a vast topic, and I loved, Tony, you gave that example of having something breaking this up into chunks. You use the example. Maybe just share quick of buying a car. Maybe just share that example again.
Yeah, so a car is a good example because it illustrates people's feelings. Some people want an older, cheaper car so that they can save some money. Other people want a newer car that's safer and has more features. And so you have these big conversations, and they're all about your feelings and where you're at. But that needs to end, and you need to have a resolution, right? At some point, you need to get those conversations to all right, we decided we're going to do this. And to kind of get that conclusion to end and to feel like the 2 of us solved the car question, right? So that we can go on to the next thing because there will be another bill or another money challenge. And so learning to hear that and talk about that and solve that as we're trying to solve the car question, not trying to convince someone, is it better to have a beater or a new car? That's a fight you don't want to have. You want to solve, what kind of car are we going to get?
Yeah, it's great.
That's great. All right, Tony, we're on to the top 2.
All right. We'll see. I don't know if you guys guessed them or not. Number 2, which means we're starting to get to topics that I hear and talk about all the time. And number 2 is sex, right? Sex issues with couples. I kind of laugh and joke is I'm a marriage therapist. How often do you think I talk about sex? About 3 or 4 times a day, right?
Wow.
We talk about it all the time. So now, the couple coming in is like, oh, they feel a little awkward or they're kind of squirming a little bit. But no, I talk about it all the time because it's a really big issue. And it's kind of like money, is it's ongoing. It always keeps happening. Hopefully you're going to have to talk about sex and your sex life for the entire length of your marriage and where that goes. So we better figure out how to communicate, how to talk about it, and how to be comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And most couples aren't very good at it, right? They're not. It's very intimate. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but sex sells like about everything. It's everywhere because it's really powerful, right? It's there. And couples need to know how to talk about it. And one of the things that I talk with couples a lot about is think about, and you guys don't have to answer out loud because I just want you thinking in your head, and same thing for you guys, is where'd you learn about sex? How did you learn about sex? Most couples or most people don't have where their parents sat them down and told them the whole story and explained it. Most of the time, the answers are, well, we learned about it in health class, right? The boys walked one way into one room, the girls walked another way in the other room. So we learned a little bit about it in school. Some of my friends, TV, kind of movies, right? So what I want you to think about is, here's this very intimate, powerful topic that you don't know much about, and you only know about it from TV, movies, and your friends. Do you believe everything your friends say? No.
Right.
Do you believe everything you see on TV? No. So there's this piece where I want couples to be comfortable talking about it, going, it's like, you don't have the whole story. You don't even know what's going on. So why wouldn't you talk with your spouse about it? And so where are you going to get this information and learn? But you start off kind of stuck.
It's interesting that it's such a sacred area, but yet we leave it to like the world to inform us.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of backwards, you know? God brought man and woman together and made them one flesh. And I think that first, I'm going to say, I think it's super cool that that's number 2 on the list. Like in a way that people come to you to talk about that. Like I'm kind of shocked, I guess. But I think that really, I hope for you, our listener, that gives you encouragement that it is okay to talk about. It's okay to talk about with your spouse. It's okay to talk about with a counselor, with all of you. I think that's really encouraging that people are having these conversations, hopefully that are getting them towards a healthy, intimate life.
Yeah. I think two things are jumping out at me, Tony, as we talk about this topic. One, I think there's a lot of complexity when it comes to sex. And I'm even separating that into, you said another word, and that's intimacy. And I think that brings up a whole different set of things. And I think the topic can be very, very complex. But that, so there's that I think brings about a lot of different dynamics. Because when you're talking about intimacy and how you feel connected and how you feel, connected to your spouse, I mean, those can be different.
Absolutely.
There's different ways to connect. And so I can see why this would be a very hard topic. And the other thing that just jumps out at me is, as Michelle said, we've left a lot of this to the world to define what sex and intimacy is. In reality, it's not what it is.
Correct.
And
that's kind of to take what we were just talking about a little further, is like, so I want couples to kind of think about it. You only got part of the story from Friends, TV, movies, right? So where are you going to get the other half of the story to know more about sex and what's going on? And the cool part is God knew, right? The answer, God's ways, is you're supposed to get it from your spouse, right?
Yeah.
That's the way he designed it. It's like, hey, where do you want to learn about spouse? Where do you want to learn about sex from? Your spouse,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
That involves that communication, talking. You don't want to learn about it from all these other places. You want to learn about it from your spouse, right? And we don't talk about it, and we just ignore it. And it's sad. It's like, but God has this cool plan for us. He's like, hey, I know it's really intimate and it's powerful and it's cool. And you know what? Get it from your spouse. Talk to them, and to do that.
You know what I think is kind of interesting is that it's a need that both the husband and the wife have. Yet I feel like, and maybe we were like this a little bit too, Ryan, where the conversation about it early on was just like, hey, do you want to? And that was like, yes or no. But it wasn't like we wouldn't have a conversation about it, like outside of in the moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like the more that we have gone to marriage retreats and read books and even had, in the last year, had guests on the podcast, that is a really healthy thing to talk about. But I think it was a weekend I remember years ago, and that was like one of the homework things I feel like was to talk about it, to actually talk about it, not like just in the moment, but to have this healthy dialogue. And I think that's maybe not very common for people.
It's not really common. I like, just as you're talking, I like that is you're like, it's very complex. Just kind of thinking, do you want to have sex? Isn't really a yes or no question. There's more to it than that.
Right.
Oh, yes. When, where, how? What's that like? What are we talking about intimacy? Are we just going to connect? Are we going to do? So there's this piece of like, hey, should we have sex? Yeah, okay. There's actually should have more conversation to that, is what that looks like. And if you don't have that conversation and you have those communication errors, that's where hurt can happen. That's where you can get your feelings hurt and feel sad. Or if we're talking about intimacy, it's like, whoa, are we talking about, did your spouse say they didn't want to have sex? Or did your spouse say they don't love and care about you and never want to be with you again? You probably should clarify that, because sometimes one spouse is saying, no, I don't want to have sex right now. And the other spouse is like, oh, you don't love and care about me?
Yeah.
That wasn't the conversation. You guys missed that. And so I like how you said it's not just a yes or no question. We have to kind of talk and communicate that. And unfortunately is, when do most couples talk about sex? Any guesses?
I have a guess. Do you have a guess?
Yeah, I mean, probably when it's a need or a want
When
or
they
a
want
desire.
to.
Yeah.
When they want to, but that's when they ask for sex. When do they have the conversation about sex isn't going well or isn't going right or isn't good? When do they have that conversation?
I don't know. When do you think?
I'm going to get during.
Well, right after it didn't go very well, right? So when they're fighting about it. So if one person says, hey, I want to have sex, and the other person says no, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need to talk about sex right now. No, that is actually the worst time to talk about sex, right? Is we're only talking about sex when we're mad and angry and upset. All the other times it's kind of like, are you good? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, cool. We don't ever really talk about it. So we're only talking about it when we're mad, angry, and hurt.
Sure.
How do you think that conversation goes?
Not
very
well.
good.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing with money. When do most couples talk about money? Oh, when they have to buy something or do something. It's actually kind of the worst time to talk about our goals and our money. Let's do that when we're calm and cool. It's the same thing with sex.
That's a good point. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, most couples only talk about sex when something didn't go right or something didn't happen. Then it's like, we need to talk. Not probably the good time to do that.
Yeah. When is a good time for them? Is this something that a couple would schedule? And then how does that conversation go?
Yeah. I don't know why you wouldn't talk about it, right? It's just basically when you talk about it, probably any other time than right then. And so, yeah, you can sit down and talk about, just like same thing with, think about money and sex, very similar, right? Because monies are things that never ends. We never quite solve that. Sex life in marriages is never something that kind of quite ends. We're going to figure out, and it changes and it fluctuates and does that. And so when should you talk about money? Man, we should sit down every month and have a budget meeting or talk about money instead of just talking about it when it's crisis mode. Same thing with sex. When should we talk about sex? Oh, you can sit down and say, hey, let's talk about it. How are we doing? Where is that at? What are we looking at? How is it going for you? How is it going for me? If you don't have those conversations, there's lots of things that just go really crappy and bad. And kind of a fun thing I do with couples is I'm like, don't say out loud, but think in your head, how often would you like to have sex? We'll just pick in a week, right? And then I know your numbers aren't going to match. No couple's number match, right? So then just for communication, we'll just talk and say, it's like, all right, we'll make it stereotypical. So let's say the guy's number is 7. I want to have sex every day of the week. This would be great and awesome, right? And the wife goes, I would like to have sex once a week. That'd be great. That'd be cool. But you never know each other's numbers, and they're never talking. And let's say the couple's actually having sex 3 times a week, but they don't know what the other person's number is. Think how they're feeling, right? The woman's approaching sex going, I am the world's greatest wife. I'm knocking it out of the park. I'm going 3 times a week. I am amazing. I'm working really hard. I am doing great. So you bring that attitude in, and then think about his attitude. Man, we're not there yet. We're only halfway there. We got to keep going. We're not there. We're not. And if you don't ever talk about that, there's lots of hurt and anger and stuff. Yeah. As soon as you guys sit down and like, hey, what are we going for? What's our plan? What are we talking about? What are we shooting for? Now, all of a sudden, that communication gets a little easier and better. And so we start talking like, oh, well, let's shoot for this number. Does that sound okay to you? It's no different, as weird as it sounds, than the car, right? So how do we meet in the middle? What does that look like, right?
Sure.
And all couples think they're like, well, it needs to be spontaneous. And this, well, you can keep talking and figure that out, right? You can say, hey, we're going to have one spontaneous one, and then we're going to have one that's automatic, and we're going to carve out time and make sure. There's all ways to kind of compromise and do that, but you need to have that conversation, and lots of couples don't even dare to go there or talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about this, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but whatever, whoever is, we've had guests on that talk about like the initiating spouse for sex, but I'm just sitting here thinking, like, I've heard so many guys talk about, I want to have more sex. So I and maybe jump in here, Tony, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, like, you want to have more sex. How many conversations about sex are you having?
Right. Or what are you doing for that?
Right.
And sex is a really unique thing. Is part of when you're hearing a guy say, I want to have sex, I want to have sex, I want to have sex, is what are you doing to have that? And how are you communicating that? And then there's that question of why. Because in general, men feel loved and valued after sex. They feel like, man, that feels great. They feel loved and connect and go. Women need to feel loved and valued to have sex. Okay. And so there's this piece of like, I want to have more sex with my wife. I want to have more sex with my wife. Okay. My first question would be is like, what are you doing to make her feel loved and valued? Because when she feels loved and valued, it matches a lot easier. Yeah. And so there's lots of those little just things. It's like, are you talking about that? How do you want to make that work? And then knowing what is intimacy, right? Intimacy is shared feelings, right? And do we always have to do it the way the guy wants, right? I mean, intimacy is share feelings. Well, I don't want to talk. Can I just show you how I feel about you? That's why guys like sex a little bit. It's like, I'd rather show you than actually tell you and explain. Okay, that's a cool way, and that's an important thing in marriage to have. But are you doing it the other way, right? Are you sharing your feelings? Are you talking about them? Intimacy is not just sex. It's how are you communicating, sharing those feelings and doing that? And how are you meeting your spouse's need and where that's at? And when you start to communicate, when you start to feel that way, it's couples come in and they're far apart, but you can bridge that gap really quickly when you start talking about, it's like, all right, what things as a guy are you doing to make your wife feel loved and valued? Oh, I don't know. Oh, as soon as you start doing those things, like, man, hey, you need to realize sometimes he feels loved and valued when he's doing that. Oh, so sometimes I'm going to have to do it his way. Sometimes I'm going to have to do it her way. And now when you know that goal is meeting that intimacy need and meeting that connection, you start to meet in the middle a lot quicker.
Totally. Pastor Keith at our church, he's our founding senior pastor here at Celebrate Community Church. He says, intimacy is into me you see. They've done that in messages, but intimacy is into me you see. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about that shared connection, it's really, I feel like, it's being vulnerable and letting your spouse in. And that does create, I think, an attraction when I know what Ryan's thinking and feeling. It like draws us together.
You want to naturally be closer to him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that brings a deeper connection of, part of, again, I'm not saying that sex is easy, but it's a physical connection. And I mean, there's a deeper connection there as well, but there's so much more to intimacy. And if I'm opening up and being, sharing with Michelle, I feel like we're connected more, mm-hmm. which I think a byproduct of that is more sex. Mm-hmm. So, I mean.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
All right. So Tony,
clearly we could go on forever on this one, but it's just
5 episodes.
Yeah, just recognize that if you're having some of those challenges in those communications, lots of couples come in and talk about that.
And a first step for them is just to have a conversation, right, Tony? Like have a conversation out of the heat of the moment about it.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah. So on to number 1.
All right. Are you guys ready?
Ryan, I'm going to move your cord here. What do you think it is? You have the notes.
Yeah. I mean, I have it in front of me, but I mean.
Would you have guessed it?
No, not at all. I would not have guessed that.
Okay. I can't remember what they say. I know that on 5 Minute Friday, we both shared communication.
I would have thought that.
And that's my guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a roundabout way, yes, it's communication. But the number one thing is I hear in marriage therapy is like, I just don't love him anymore. I don't think we're in love. Or another variation of that is we're just roommates. Right? We just do life together. We're just roommates.
Wow.
And that's why people come into therapy is they don't feel like they're in love with their spouse anymore. Or they feel like their spouse is just a roommate. Right? And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But the answer is you're disconnected, right? You're not on the same page. That's why they're the roommate. That's why they're not in love. And people don't make that connection. They just go, I don't love my spouse anymore. Okay, why? Tell me about it. And then I'll start asking some questions. Okay, what are you guys doing? Where do you go? When did this start happening? What was going on? And pretty soon you get this answer of like, well, I don't know, we never talk. We don't do anything. We had these fights and these arguments and he wasn't caring, so I just stopped. And what you end up hearing is you don't love him because he's a stranger, right? And it actually kind of makes sense. Is how many strangers do you love?
Right.
Not too many. So I always tell couples, okay, we can kind of work on that. And the husband's sitting there and he's like, she don't love me anymore. And he gets kind of scared. I'm like, dude, that's okay. She's just being honest. I'm not scared. I'll be scared when you guys come in and you go, man, we're communicating, we're talking, we're on the same page. We are just in sync. And I don't think I love him anymore. If I hear that, I'm getting scared.
Yeah.
But I almost rarely hear that, right? The answer is, yeah, you feel like they're a roommate or you feel like they're disconnected because you're not talking to them. You're not communicating. And that distance, once it starts happening, is you just get quieter and quieter and further away and you just become roommates or two ships passing in the night.
So my first response to this, I think, is kind of shock. Like that is the number one thing that you see. Part of it, first, I'm so glad that the couples are brave and like wanting to go in for therapy. But I guess I didn't realize what a big, like, I don't want to say issue, but like what a big, issue this is across the board for people. And I think that is interesting because, Ryan, we've talked about this on shows before, The Drift, the Red Flags is some of our first episodes, but is this, I think it makes me worried for people, especially Ryan. I feel like we see a lot of this with people that have young kids is like, I worry about them. I feel like I hear that all the time, like, oh, we're two ships passing in the night. And it's like, to me, that feels like red flags when you have one parent going here, one going there. Tony, my question is this: are these things that just happen, or is it over time?
Yeah.
Is this just a lot of little stuff over time?
It's a lot of stuff. It's communication errors over time. But the scary is, and this is why couples come into counseling, which means they're hurting. They're not in a good spot when they come in. I would love it if they came in at number 5. Hey, can you help us get a little better? Right? When couples come in and they're saying, I'm not in love with him anymore, or I'm not in love with her anymore, we're just roommates, we never talk, we never connect. Your marriage is not doing well when that happens, right? And so there's that piece of, they're coming in because they've waited too long, right? You hear like, oh, these red flags and these things is, you can ignore them for a while, but if you don't have a plan and you're not actively working on your marriage and doing stuff, you can drift apart and you can get really far. And sometimes it's a short-term thing. It's like, oh, then we kind of slow down, we get back together. But if you don't have those communication skills and you don't put that effort in, that we talked about that the last episode, is either going forward or you're going backwards. You're never just coasting and staying the same. So if you're not putting that effort in, you're gradually going backwards and backwards. And unfortunately, lots of times people don't come into therapy till they kind of look up one day and they're like, I don't know this person. And then they're like, uh-oh, they kind of get panicky. I'm in trouble. We need to go to therapy. We need to figure this out. And they're like, they feel like their marriage is ending and it's terrible and bad because I don't love this person anymore. It's like, whoa, let's slow down. How connected are you? How well are you communicating? And almost always they're like, oh, we never talk. We don't do anything together anymore. Oh, okay. Well, let's start working on some of those things. Or what happens is people get hurt and then they just stop talking. Oh, he hurt me, so I don't want to talk to him anymore because he's not listening. Well, that might have been 2 years ago.
Wow.
And and if you're busy with kids and stuff, there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of things going on where we don't have to face that issue. We don't have to deal with that. We don't have to communicate, right? I don't have to tell him that he really hurt me. He missed it and he didn't get it. And he may never even know that happened, or vice versa, right? And so it's just like, when that happens, it's like, oh no, here we go. Because from a therapist standpoint, it's like, oh, I got to convince you guys to take the risk, right? If your marriage is in the spot where you say, I don't feel like I love my spouse and we're just roommates, one of the first things I'm going to ask you is, are you willing to get your heart hurt again? Meaning, are you willing to invest? If you are, we're good. We can make this work. If you're not, what's going to make it change?
Their heart hurt, and that like going through the therapy might hurt a little. Is that what you mean, or what?
That is usually when they're not talking to each other. There's been some hurt and pain, so they're on their own spot. And then crazy Mr. Therapist comes in and goes like, "Hey, let's talk and share our feelings again." And they're like, "Whoa, this didn't work the last time. I don't want to do this." And I wanted you to go like, "Are you going to be willing to get your heart hurt? Meaning, are you willing to be vulnerable? Yeah. Are you willing to share your feelings? Because if you are, now we can do this. And when you share your feelings, I'm going to make sure your spouse knows what you're saying, knows that you're saying something important, and that it matters, right? And so that's that communication thing, is when we start to communicate and share our feelings, let's make sure we know how to do it, and let's make sure the other person's ready this time.
Yeah. You're going to open it up a little bit to like repair and sew it up. If we're like sewing up a wound or something, you're not going to just rip it open. Like, it's going to be a little painful, but the goal is healing.
Correct.
On the other side of that. Yeah.
I mean, I instantly think of just a lot of small decisions, just, expand that over a lot of time. And maybe in the moment it doesn't seem that way, but you just keep doing that, or keep, all of these things we've talked about. Is it easier to avoid them? Probably in the short term, but then eventually you get to this point where you're like, we don't like money. We're on completely opposite. I'm not even going to talk to him because he can't, it's just going to create problems. And it's just, it continues to get bigger and bigger until, like you said, you're just there one day and you're like, well, I don't love him anymore. I don't love her anymore. And but I think, I'm also hearing like on the flip side of that, of, little things, little connection, little things over that can do the opposite effect of that. And, I'm just thinking, like, if somebody's in this situation, what's the first step for them? If they're looking at their spouse, or they're listening right now and they're looking at their spouse and they're thinking, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah.
Like, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is tell them. But before you tell them differently. Because what you've been doing isn't working. So if you're going to say, hey, I'm hurting, I'm feeling far away, you've probably been saying that, but you've been saying it differently. You never listen to me, right? You say these little short things and kind of is, if you're hurting and you're going to share your feelings, make sure that person's ready to hear that and receive that, right? In therapy, we talk a lot, like, I got to earn the right to hear your feelings. They're really valuable. They're really important. You need to trust me to do that. You can't just quick say something to your spouse if you guys have been disconnected for a long time and your heart's hurting and you're like, yeah, Tony, I don't feel like I love him and this is going on, I'll tell you, tell him, but make sure he hears it, slow it down, and just goes like, hey, I'm struggling. I'm feeling really far away from you. Can we talk about this? Or can we go get some help? Can we talk with someone else about it? Just do it a little bit different and make that feeling clear so that that person doesn't miss it. Because the other kind of thing that I hear in therapy, which is always kind of funny, is a couple will come in and the wife will tell me, here's the problems and here's what's going on. I'll be like, hey, why are you here, buddy? And he's like, well, my wife made me. What do you mean? Did she pick you up? Did she carry you in here? She don't look that big. How'd she do that? Well, she told me she was going to leave if I didn't come. Oh, she didn't actually make you. What you're actually telling her is like, I don't want to lose her.
Yeah.
So I'm here because I don't want to lose her. Well, what happened in that circumstance is he finally heard her.
Sure.
Right? She may have been saying that a lot of different ways and a lot of different things, but all of a sudden she's been so fed up. She goes, if you don't come in, I'm gone. And he's like, whoa, I don't want to lose you. What's going on?
Sure.
And it's really frustrating sometimes for that other spouse. They're like, I've been telling you that. I've been doing this. Like, yeah, but for whatever reason, that's that communication stuff, is he missed it, right? And so the reality is she didn't drag him there. He didn't want to lose his wife. And that's the start where we get to start going, hey, we can build on that.
Yeah.
We can start making that the new way.
Tony, I've got a follow-up question for you. And part of like, I'm picking up some of the things you're saying here, and I'm just curious. Is this typically this line? Does it typically come from a female?
Most of the time, yes. Not always.
Does it come as a shock to the spouse?
Surprisingly so, yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens is we're talking about something that's happened over a long period of time, right?
Yeah.
And in general, men tend to be these more thinkers and women tend to be these more emotional people. And so I'm the opposite, actually. So, and my wife's a thinker. I'm an emotional person. But there's this piece where she's been saying, I'm hurting. Ah, she's fine. I'm hurting. Ah, she's fine. And then if life gets busy, he actually looks up. Oh, she looks fine. She's kind of moved on. She's not talking about it anymore, but she's not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it kind of keeps building and building and building. And then all of a sudden, she can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
Right? She's like, I can't do this anymore. And he's like, whoa, I think she's serious.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating for her. It's like, I was been serious for a while, but in his defense, sometimes she is only talking about it when she absolutely can't handle it anymore, right? So there are some of these big overreactions, and she'll make these statements like, you're never this, or we can't do this, or we might as well do, and then it's this really big thing, and he's like, oh, do I believe what she said or not? And then he looks a little while later and like, oh, she looks good. We're okay. She's moved on.
Yeah.
So I guess she was just kind of overreacting. And so it's not just his fault that he's missing it. It's that communication. How are you sending the message? How are you listening? And that's what we actually do in therapy is, can you communicate the message? And do you know the meaning behind the message?
Yeah, that's good. I asked that just to, and I think for if there are guys listening that are not relaying that message, how important that is.
Right.
To relay that message to your spouse of, to not get to that point where they're like, hey, I'm ready to leave.
Yeah.
To relay that message daily at how much your wife means to you.
Right. And that's that communication is, all right, if you are a guy listening and we're, like I said, we're doing the stereotypicals, it can be the other way around, right? I get relationships where the woman wants more sex than the man, right? There's relationships where the man wants more connection and is saying this and the woman is missing. So it can be other ways. But if you're that person, if you're a man and you're like, I wonder how my wife's doing. Is she really in love with me? Are we roommates? Go ask.
Yeah.
Right? Or when she's upset and she's saying something, it's okay to go, how serious is this? What's going on? And if you're hurting and your husband isn't listening to you or your spouse and you're trying to tell them that you care and you're hurting and they're not getting it, there's one of two answers. Either they're a jerk and they don't care, or they're missing it.
Yeah.
And more times than not, they're missing it.
Yeah.
I think this whole topic is such a good reminder, like you guys said, for the spouse that maybe is the little more unaware one to keep pressing in. Last week's episode, we talked about intimacy being intimacy. No, that was this week's episode. You just edit that part. We talked earlier about intimacy is into me, you see. Mm-hmm. And I think sharing that vulnerability with your spouse, we've talked about this before, Ryan, that I think when you get home after a long day and you might feel tired, it is probably easier to sit down, watch TV, zone out, because it takes effort to be like, hey, here's what happened today. But if you push through and do that, it's such a rich connection, but it takes a conscious effort to do that, to be like, you know what? I want to open up a little bit of my day to Ryan. And even though it's like with your kids, like, how was your day at school? It was fine. Don't do that to your spouse.
Right.
Let them in. That's intimacy. Into me, you see. That is like connecting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really important. And we're talking about heavy topics all in here. But remember how the last episode ended. And you start to see why I paused you guys and point out is it doesn't always have to be heavy stuff. Remember we talked about the flutter thing and the things that are nice. Like, hey, have those conversations, right? You don't always, if your only conversation with your wife is like, are you still mad at me? Are we okay? And that's it? Man, that's not really cool.
Yeah.
And so we don't always have to talk about the hard, tricky stuff. Talk about the fun, cool stuff, right? That's why I was like, hey, did you see what happened? You guys are sharing how you're feeling.
Yeah.
It was cool. It was fun. That's that into me you see, right? That's some of that connection that you had. And so when we're always talking about tough stuff and problems and different things, I want you guys to know it's like there is the fun, cool stuff too, is you can do, it doesn't always have to be like, what's our problem now? What's the next thing to fix? Feed into each other some of those cool things. That's why I love that question last week, and you guys were able to talk and smile. Like, that's what couples can do too to bring that connection. Good job, you guys.
All right.
Do you have anything else on that topic
No,
before we go into this?
I think it's a great conversation. Obviously, we kind of scratched the surface, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. But I think it's understanding, resources are available, people are available, and how important that conversation is.
I think 2 out of these 5 topics is really giving people the courage and confidence to go and know that you're not alone. Yeah. I mean, these are common things, and going to get that additional help at counseling. Yeah. All right, you guys, we are going to move into our mystery question time, and I want to put a disclaimer before we jump into this. So this one's a little more sensitive, and first, we just want to say thank you for trusting us with these questions and for sending them in. And this one's really, they're being vulnerable. So thank you for inviting us into that conversation. And while Ryan and I don't know these questions when they come in, they truly are mysteries to us when we read them. Our producer snagged this one and said, hey, you guys, we're going to do this when a professional counselor is on the show with you, when Tony is back on. So I do want to give also a little bit of a trigger warning. And also, if you're listening with kids in the car, it might be a good time to pause it and come back. But the trigger for this would just be sexual trauma and abuse. So Tony, I'm going to hand this question to you. to read, and we'll go from there.
All right. My spouse was sexually abused early on in life. What would you recommend, or what advice would you give to help us work through that in marriage and move forward? Great question.
I feel like that, I'm so sorry that happened to your spouse. I want to say that first. And I'm glad that they asked that question, because I feel like the more women I talk to, so very sadly, it's more common than you would think.
Yeah,
so I feel like this is an important
it's
conversation.
a really important question. And there's a couple things in here. One, with you is like that having to suffer trauma is awful. It's not good. There's actually some hope in this question. And the hope and the cool part is, one, you shared it with your husband. And so communicating that is really good, because you're right, Michelle, there are lots of women that have been abused or do that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them that will keep it to themselves and not tell anybody, and deal with the struggles and the effects of the trauma all by themselves. And so it's really good that you shared that with your husband or your spouse, however it went. And the cool part is, the other part of that hope that's really neat is your husband wants to help you, right? He's like, how do I do this? What do I do with this? And that's a really important part in why you hear that all the time is tell your story so that you're not alone, so that you can get help. And this is an example. You took a risk and shared that with your husband. And I've dealt with questions and trauma and things like this. So I know there's been a lot of trauma and hurt and arguments, and it didn't go smoothly through that all. But there's this piece where he wants to figure out what to do and how he can help. And the first thing I would do is, speaking to you, the person that asked this question, is just remember, it's not about you, right? You weren't there for the trauma. You weren't there for this. And so when we talk about sexual abuse and trauma, when you're trying to connect with your wife and she's getting hurt or triggered or pushing you back, just to kind of really remember, it has nothing to do with you. And we talked in the episode about sex, and that's it's a big, powerful, intimate thing. And we need to remember that it's not about you, right? It's about that past. And that's what I would tell her too, is that was past. You learned in that sexual abuse, you learned all the bad, terrible things about sex. You have someone in your life that sounds like is willing to want to learn all the good, cool things. And so is go slow, do that together, talk together, and to just communicate and be really real, to know is, hey, sometimes there's a few times where it will get scary, or it will trigger, it will hurt her, and she'll be scared and need to push back. It's not a reflection on your love. It's just a reflection on, oh, there's some past hurt. How do we deal with that? And going forward, if you have that attitude of, how can I help you? What can I do to change that story? And let's create this story going forward is my advice. And definitely go find a therapist, right? This is a 2-minute answer, right? There is a lot of stuff to unpack and emotions on both sides and all that stuff. But start with just kind of find the hope, which is you shared it, which is awesome. And he wants to help, which is awesome. I would just tell you then the next simple step is go find the help.
Yeah. That's so good, Tony. I think that's such a great answer. And obviously Michelle and I are not therapists. The first thing that popped into my head though was gentleness in it, of just being gentle with your spouse. And that is a process. And, but there are people that can help you. We've said that so many times, like, whatever it is, you are not alone. You are not the only person. There are people that can help with it. I think that's I I love the answer.
I'm just feeling called to like pray for this couple. If we can
Yeah.
do that, that's my response, and maybe it's something that they can do together.
Yeah.
But let us pray for you right now. And if this
Absolutely.
is your situation, this prayer is for you too. So, Father God, we thank you for the listeners of this marriage cast, and God, we thank you for the questions that they have sent in, and we thank you for the vulnerability that they have handed over to us, and we're holding this gently in our hands. God, we just thank you that there's a safe place to talk about this. We thank you that this wife has shared with her husband and trusts him and is placing her heart gently in his hands, that he is able to hear this and have compassion. And God, I thank you that this husband is really seeking to learn, that he is wanting to know how to walk with his wife. And we just pray for their journey forward. Like Tony said, this is a couple minute segment, but God, I just pray for discernment for them. I pray for wisdom and just direction for where that next step would be for them, where they could go for help, where they could go to continue healing through this, and that you would just hold them so gently, and that they would know that you love them, and help to remind them that they are on the same team, and you brought them together. So God, we thank you, and we lift this up to you in your Son's holy and precious name. Amen.
Amen.
You guys, thanks for submitting that question. And if you have a question for us on the Celebrate MarriageCast, you can send that to 605-951-0110. And let's see, what else? Any closing remarks? That wraps up our top 5 issues in marriage counseling. Both weeks were so good, Tony.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
And just hopefully you saw and learned that having a question, getting stuck, going and finding someone to ask for help is not a shameful thing. It's not a bad thing. Doesn't mean your marriage is doomed or anything is awful. It's like, no, get stuck, go ask for help and move on. You ask for help in a lot of other places with a lot of other different things, whether if you have a car problem, different things like that, you go ask for help. Don't be afraid to go ask for help with marriage counseling. It's not that bad.
That's so true.
Awesome.
Today I called a plumber and a drywaller because we're not experts. So go see the experts. So Tony, thank you again for being here this week and last week, 5 Minute Friday. And hey, for you, our listener, again, thank you for joining us. You can find us at celebrate.church/marriage. You can find us on Instagram at Celebrate MarriageCast. And we hope that you have a great rest of your week. See ya.